Otto for a three-judge Ontario Divisional Court wrote in the case of Tremblay and the town of Lakeshore. The Ontario Heritage Act was Ontario's response to a worldwide effort at preserving for future generations works which have acquired cultural significance. The purpose of the Act is to provide for the conservation, protection, and preservation of the heritage of Ontario. In order to protect the heritage of Ontario, municipalities have been given the power to designate the properties of their choice and thus to suspend certain private property rights. Those provisions of the Act must be applied in such a way as to ensure the attainment of the legislature's objectives. There are numerous examples of where one's private enjoyment of one's property is, to use the term of the court, suspended or constrained. Such constraints can be of a public or private nature. Examples of public constraints are zoning bylaws, such as would prevent, for example, the construction of a 30-story high-rise or a gas storage facility in an area of single-family homes. The bylaws relating to the maintenance of the property, the storage of derelict vehicles and equipment on the property, and commercial signage. Examples of private constraints are the general law of nuisance, where your enjoyment of your property infringes on my enjoyment of my property, and the restrictive covenants which run with the land, governing such things as the color that one can paint one's house, the type of shingles that can be used, etc. Designating a property under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act is simply another example of where one's private interests are not unbridled. Property owners raise numerous complaints regarding such constraints. For example, I should be able to maximize the value of my property as I see fit, or my property rights should not be impinged without my consent. Indeed, in the Tremblay case, where third parties sought to have a church designated a heritage site under the Ontario Heritage Act, the town of Lakeshore made such designation contingent on the owner giving its consent. In concluding that requiring such consent was, quote, both unreasonable and patently unreasonable, unquote. Now, those are the standards for challenging an administrative law decision before a court. Justice Bonotto wrote, requiring the consent of the owner is not consistent with an overall reading of the Act or its purpose. Indeed, the Act contemplates notice to the owner, possible objections, and a hearing process. The object of the Act is the conservation and protection of the heritage of Ontario. This may interfere with individual property rights. Accordingly, in requiring the consent of the owner as a precondition to designation, the town placed an unreasonable obstacle on its own discretionary powers, thereby fettering its discretion and aborting the process intended by the Act. It is submitted that at this stage in the designation process, the only issue is the heritage merits of Loris Secord Memorial School. If I can digress, the presentation from the representative from the school board spoke only in terms of time and cost. That is not the issue before you this evening. Under the Ontario Heritage Act, the issue is preservation of a significant piece of built heritage in our community. The school board had its opportunity to appear before the Municipal Heritage Committee to argue that the school lacked heritage merits. It did not do so, nor indeed did it do this evening. Judging by comments reported in the local print media, it is the school board's position that designation will devalue their property. Again, check with Leah Wallace, your heritage officer. That is a debatable point. Regardless, Niagara-on-the-Lake Council's task this evening is to pass judgment on the heritage merits of the school. In making that judgment, Council has the unanimous recommendation of its own heritage experts, the Municipal Heritage Committee, that it warrants such designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The Queenston Regional Association supports that recommendation. We submit that the school warrants such designation under Ontario Regulation 9/006, entitled Criteria for Determining Cultural Heritage Value or Interest, unquote, under all three criteria. Namely, the property has design value or physical value. Secondly, the property has historical value or associative value. And thirdly, most importantly, the property has contextual value. The time has come for council to protect what for the residents of Queenston is our equivalent to the courthouse in Old Town. The school board can pursue its heritage arguments before the Conservation Review Board if it disagrees with such designation. After writing this, I was talking to Jim Armstrong, who indicated that one member of council was concerned that if this was approved, that it would potentially lead to a challenge before the Ontario Municipal Board. It cannot lead to a challenge before the Ontario Municipal Board. The challenge, if the school board disagrees, is a challenge on heritage merits before the Conservation Review Board. But as we saw in the Lakeshore, Town of Lakeshore case, failure to designate by taking into account non-heritage issues could lead to you ending up before a court of law arguing that your decision was unreasonable or patentable. But it will not be before the Ontario Municipal Board.
Thank you. Are there questions of Mr. Fritz?
This one,
Councillor Viola.
it just interests me, Lord, but it's not really more of a question on the substance of his presentation. Thank you for that comments, very impressive. But I just wonder, because you're a resident of Queenston, may I know through you, Lord Mayor, what is your professional background? Are you retired? You live in Queenston?
A resident of Queenston. I've owned property there since 2002. I've lived full-time since 2008. Prior to that time, I was a professor and associate dean of law for 34 years. I wasn't associate dean for all that period of time, but I was a professor of law for 34 years. Plus, before that, I was a researcher for the Law Reform Commission of Canada for 2 years. So I have an LLB, an LLM.
No wonder there's such substance in the presentation. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming forward.